Hello everyone and welcome to the Moisky News for June the 15th, 2021. Today I thought we'd talk about Cenk Uygur, the progressive con artist. Many of you will have heard of Cenk either from the dead YouTube channel that only gets mega traffic during election season, The Young Turks, or from the responses by serial shit stirrer Bearing. Hi Bearing darling, hope you're well. If you're more of a Twitter user though, you'll know him as someone that professes to be progressive and then gets ratioed into oblivion for whatever point he is trying to push, that is then summarily thrown back in his face with contradictory tweets from not long before. This being a prime example right here. Democracy is such a messy, wonderful thing. Through the invisible hand of the market, we have found ourselves with a comforting grandpa as our leader at a time when we needed an old, comfortable sweater. Time to lean back on the couch for a couple of years while we catch our breath from the 6th of November 2020 and then on the 12th of June 2021. Joe Biden's plan all along was to pretend to have a bold progressive agenda, then pass COVID relief bill, a Republican infrastructure bill that's a fraction of his proposal and half of HR 1. If he does that, his legacy will be the nothing will fundamentally change president. The key issue many pointed to here was the fact that he pushed Joe Biden throughout the election cycle as the all good, all great. But once he got it, he then started to notice it wasn't all great. Which can be seen as a good thing, I will concede. But Cenk Uygur is a known hypocrite here. Cenk Uygur likes to model himself as a progressive shill. That is a known champagne socialist hypocrite that adds about as much to the conversation on progressive ideas as a mime does to a debate team. He is, matter-of-factly, intellectually dishonest, and also extremely passionate about the Democrats winning at all costs. Even if that means accepting his side's failings eventually as long as the red team doesn't win. And anyone that challenges this idea, well, he challenges them as a journalist.
Obviously, it's hard to tell who's telling the truth here, but lately, I have to confess that WikiLeaks has not had an astounding record. The way that Assange seems to be backing Donald Trump over and over and over again, it makes me very seriously question Assange's efforts to actually be a journalist.
That clip came from the Twitter of Jimmy Dore, a former employee of The Young Turks, who left. Cenk's not overly fond of that. He's not fond of anyone that leaves. Especially if they leave around the time efforts were made to create a union for employees of the Young Turks. A very progressive position, don't you think? Something which Cenk Uygur destroyed. He's not a hypocrite though, is he? Do I need my sarcasm signed for that one? Cenk Uygur is such a champagne socialist, by the way. He accepted $20 million from a massive donor of the DNC party. He himself considers himself a journalist. But he's taking money from one side? That's fascinating. If anyone is interested in seeing Cenk utterly lose his shit, along with showing his matter-of-factly intellectually dishonest and extremely passionate personality traits, his confrontations with Alex Jones, along with the Young Turks' coverage of Donald Trump becoming the President of the United States, where the salt mines prospered, are prime examples of all of these more notorious traits. I'm almost certain now many of you are now wondering why on earth would Meg want to talk about Cenk? Well, it's because Cenk Uygur was actually trending on Twitter, and I found it quite fascinating, because he'd retweeted the Washington Post, who had said a Moscow court declared the political and anti-corruption networks of jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny extremist organizations, a move that will essentially crush the most formidable resistance to the Kremlin and force it underground. Which sounds like Russian politics for the better part of 100 years. Maybe they should bring back Tsars. And I don't mean the royal family. Retweeting that, Cenk Uygur said, genuine question. Have Aaron Mate? He has a hate boner for him. Max Blumenthal? Another hate boner. G. Greenwald? Do I need to continue saying hate boner? And Jimmy Dore condemned this hideous authoritarian and corrupt actions of the Putin government. I'm not asking you if you want to bomb them, so don't strawman it. It's a layup and you might have condemned him already. For the sake of it, They don't have to do something because you try and morally guilt them into doing it. But you did that, and it got a response. With Glenn Greenwald calling him delusional, thinking that there's something brave and courageous as opposed to obedient and pointless, about some American sitting in the US denouncing Kremlin leaders. I can't imagine the moral courage that takes so brave and purposeful. And to further continue this point, when it came to tagging Max Blumenthal, he quite rightly pointed out that the Young Turk have an obsession with Aramate, because after they promise to feature a journalist from Syria who will bring receipts, the Young Turks wind up hosting Brooklyn-based American interventionalist Patrick Hillsman to spout more tired regime change propaganda. And when I mention that, I have to now reference the fact that when the Young Turks covered the Syrian presidential election, they basically threw out every sarcastic, tired remark they could possibly say instead of saying the honest thing, because they'd rather allude to something that is conspiratorial than actually admit to it, which is quite interesting. No election conspiracies when it suits you, right? Okay. And also, the fact you didn't bring any receipts meant you were trying to assert something that is intellectually dishonest, and you call yourselves journalists. When you, as a channel and a business, take vast sums from DNC donors, get huge bailouts from the federal government to pay staff when your turnover is over 5 million, you quash a union and attack any and all journalists that challenge establishment power, how are you yourselves journalists? You might be able to try and hide it under the guise of skepticism, but in reality, you're only challenging those that challenge you. You claim to be progressive, but everything you've ever done goes against it. And by the way, the claim that 2/3 of Americans are progressive, according to polling, which I assume was done at a hipster's bar, is utter nonsense, because if 2/3 of the US are progressive, then the magnitude of how utterly ineffective you guys are is staggering. That comes from Scott Solomon, by the way.